Buffalo Soldier, Second Lieutenant Vernon Baker. 22-year-old Vernon Baker wanted something more out of life. As a young African-American man in Cheyenne, Wyoming, a town with only a dozen other black families, his options were limited. It was 1941, a time when the fabric of the United States had been stained by racism, and yet Baker wanted to serve his country in the military. He walked into an Army recruiting office where a scowling sergeant was sitting behind the desk reading a magazine and deliberately ignoring him for several minutes. Finally, the sergeant looked up and snarled, "What do you want?" "I want to enlist in the Army," Baker replied. "We don't have any need for people like you," sneered the sergeant. Then he returned to his reading, pretending that Baker was no longer there. Baker seethed, but kept his anger in check. As he headed out the door, he glanced at the recruiting poster on the wall. Uncle Sam was pointing and saying, "I want you." The irony did not escape him. Orphaned at age 4 when his parents were killed in a car accident, Baker was raised by his grandparents in their boarding house in Cheyenne. He spent 2 years at Father Flanagan's boys' home in Omaha, Nebraska, and graduated from high school in Iowa. He worked as a railroad porter and a shoeshine boy, but that kind of life held no future for him. He was determined to join the Army. He swallowed his pride and returned to the recruiting office. His gut was twisting with the thought of facing that bigot again. But this time, a different sergeant was sitting behind the desk. "Could I help you?" the recruiter asked politely. "Yes, I'd like to enlist in the Army," Baker answered. "Fine, son. Pull up a chair and let's see if I can help you out." Baker soon was a member of the U.S. Army, a segregated army, which he was reminded of time and again. Days after he enlisted, Baker stepped off the train in Mineral Wells, Texas, and boarded a bus for Camp Walters for basic training. He sat down in a seat directly behind the driver. In a split second, the driver wheeled around and roared, "Get up and get to the back of the bus where you belong." Baker shot up and clenched his fists, ready to swing, but an older black man rushed forward and grabbed him by the collar. "You planning to die on your first day in Texas?" he drawled. "In case you haven't noticed, you're a colored man. Colored folks can't sit anywhere they please in the South." Nobody here would try to sit up front unless he wanted to get killed. The resentment Baker felt because of prejudice against his race intensified during his early Army days. After basic training, he transferred to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where he made the company clerk because he could read, write, and type. Soon after the United States entered the war, he was promoted to staff sergeant. At the fort, many white soldiers had spent 20 years as privates and corporals without being promoted because they couldn't read or write. They resented high school graduates who were promoted over them. Seeing a black man with all those stripes infuriated them. One night, as Baker was returning to his quarters, 3 white veteran corporals surrounded him. "What we got here is a real smart black boy," growled one sarcastically. Then they pounced on him, punching him in the head and stomach until he was a bloody mess. Leaving him sprawled on the ground, they chortled, "Yeah, that's one smart black boy." Baker kept the assault to himself. He knew that if he reported it, he faced retaliation. Once again, he swallowed his pride and kept his temper in check. It wasn't easy, but he remembered something his grandfather always told him: "Don't hate, because if you hate, it will destroy you." Baker eventually went to officer candidate school, where blacks ate and slept in their own barracks and joined the whites only in class. He passed with flying colors and was commissioned as second lieutenant on January 11, 1943. He was assigned to the 370th Regiment, 92nd Infantry, and all-black division known as the Buffalo Soldiers. The name originally had been given to black soldiers a century earlier during the Indian Wars. "You know why we call you that?" Baker's white commander said. "It's because you black boys' skin and nappy hair remind us of buffaloes." The commander added that the War Department had decided that all black combat troops had to be led by white Southerners, because we know best how to handle you people. One day during the summer, all of the officers were called to division headquarters. Even though Baker was an officer, he and the other black officers always had to enter through the back door, while the white officers came in the front. But on this day, the black officers weren't allowed inside at all and were told to sit under a nearby tree. Later, the chief of staff came out and told them, "The division is going to ship out soon. All the white boys have been going overseas, and now it's time for you black boys to go get killed." He flashed a sinister grin. The resentment that Baker and his black comrades felt was tempered by their anticipation of finally seeing combat. From the moment the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor, the black soldiers yearned to fight an enemy, even if it meant joining forces filled with racists. Baker knew firsthand his homeland was imperfect, but he believed it was still the best country in the world. The Buffalo Soldiers were sent to Italy to help drive out the German troops who occupied the country. As their ship crossed the Atlantic, Baker realized that most of the men couldn't read or write, so he wrote letters home for them. Once the men reached Italy, they marched north towards the town of Pisa and Lucca in the front lines. Despite white officers' mistaken belief that blacks couldn't fight at night, the blacks' first 4 months in combat were spent on effective night patrols that often led to skirmishes with Germans. In one of the encounters, Baker was shot in the wrist and needed surgery to repair it. He tried to look out for his men, encourage them to fight for America and not for the Southern white colonels and generals who considered black soldiers inferior, no matter how well the African Americans completed their missions. It's difficult to tell who the bigger racists are, the commanders behind us or the Germans in front of us, he admitted to the men in his platoon. The enemy fortifications seemed impossible to breach up and down the Gothic line, a 200-mile-wide defense along mountain ridgelines. The Gothic line guarded all the routes to northern Italy and prevented any advance into the Po Valley, an agricultural and manufacturing area vital to supporting the Nazi war machine. Huge German guns protected exposed slopes and were aimed straight down roads, ravines, and gullies. Built in the sides of mountains were thousands of bunkers, machine gun nests, and observation posts. They were all reinforced with rocks, logs, railroad ties, and several feet of dirt, and they blended in with the rocky terrain to provide excellent camouflage. The 92nd Division's objective, Castle Agenolfi, a massive stone fortress that sat atop a mountain on the western edge of the Gothic line. Originally built in the 5th century AD, the fort was surrounded by rock walls, barbed wire, minefields, and a chain of howitzers, mortars, and other artillery. From every direction, the Germans could see and then bombard any advancing armies. The only possible way to attack was by sending the infantry up a trio of terraced mountains, which the Allies named Hills X, Y, and Z, that led to a castle from the south. Early in 1945, the Allies made 3 attempts to capture the castle, but failed each time when the German guns shelled them into oblivion. Baker was told that his company, Company C, would lead the next charge for Castle Agenolfi. In the pre-dawn hours of April 5th, 1945, he donned his best, freshly cleaned uniform. If this is going to be my last day on Earth, I want to go out looking sharp, he thought. He strapped 2 bandoliers of ammunition around his waist and clipped 4 grenades on his belt webbing. Then he clutched his trusty M1 rifle. He left his helmet behind because he found it too cumbersome and instead wore a stocking cap. Baker was in charge of a short-handed weapons platoon of 26 black men who carried either 30 caliber machine guns or 66 millimeter mortar tubes and mortar rounds. Men, today we're going to do it, he declared. We're going to capture that castle. The men nodded. At 4:45 a.m., Allied artillery, including tanks, howitzers, and long-range guns from British battleships, blasted the sides of the mountain. Baker and his soldiers, who were part of a much larger assault force, ran in the darkness across exposed countryside and then headed up Hill X, a half-mile away. As they advanced, he snipped German communications lines that were strung along the hill. Baker kept scanning the area side to side, front to rear. Then he spotted 2 German machine gunners. He raised his rifle and squeezed off 2 rounds. Both men fell dead. He ditched their weapon and replaced it with one from his platoon, manned by 2 of his soldiers. A few hundred yards away, Baker shot and killed more enemy machine gunners and replaced them with his men. Sneaking across the hill, he spotted 2 tubes poking out of a slit, gun barrels in a camouflage bunker. He crawled on his belly until he was at the edge of the bunker. 1, 2, 3, here I go. He leaped up and stuck the barrel of his gun inside the slit and began firing as fast as he could. Then he jumped to the side and put a fresh clip in his weapon. He waited for return fire. There wasn't any. He moved to the bunker and peered inside. 1 German was dead. The other was still alive and reaching for a stash of grenades in the corner. Baker yanked the grenade off his belt, pulled the pin, and threw it into the bunker. It exploded in a spray of dirt, logs, and rocks. He discovered that that bunker was not a machine gun nest, but an observation post. He cut the communication wire and returned to his men. They continued towards the next terrace when, not more than 50 feet ahead of him, he spotted another hidden machine gun nest. Too late. They're going to kill me. He started shooting in the slit and was relieved when they didn't fire back. When he looked inside, he saw 2 dead Germans. At the moment he killed them, they had been eating their breakfast rather than keeping an eye for invaders. Lucky break. In the first 2 hours of the assault, Baker had brought his platoon 3 miles inside enemy lines and had single-handedly destroyed 3 machine gun nests and an observation post and cut communication lines. This is going better than I imagined. But at 7 a.m., Baker and his men were at the edge of a rocky clearing that sloped up towards the walls of the castle. There's no way we can rush the castle without getting picked off, he thought. But orders are orders. It's the only way. Meeting with his company commander, who was a white captain, Baker ordered his machine gunners to provide covering fire for the castle assault. As he and the captain were talking, they spotted a German flinging a grenade at them. The captain yelped and took off running, knocking Baker's gun barrel. By the time Baker could take aim, the grenade had landed 5 feet from him. Thinking he was about to die, Baker shot and killed the soldier as a final act of defiance. Incredibly, the grenade did not explode. Lady Luck, thank you. Please stay with me. Baker carefully followed the trail the German had been on and discovered that it ended at another observation post. He tossed in 2 more grenades, killing another 4 Germans. Then he raced back towards his men. By now, the Germans were launching a salvo of mortar rounds at the Americans, killing and wounding several of them. Second Lieutenant Walker, whose job was directing Allied artillery fire, was on the radio phone, giving coordinates to officers miles away. He was getting frustrated. Baker, they don't believe we could have made it this far behind enemy lines. Baker grabbed the phone and told the officer on the other end, look, we're 150 yards south of the castle and we're getting pounded by mortar rounds. We desperately need artillery fire from the German mortar positions. Now, our medics can't get to the wounded and... He looked up. About a dozen mortar rounds were flying towards them. Cover! He yelled. Everyone dived to the ground. Kaboom! 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 The earth shook and men screamed. Then, machine gun fire erupted from the castle, prompting Baker to shout, Move, men! Keep moving or die! The soldiers who hadn't been killed or wounded hurriedly backtracked a few hundred yards behind several boulders. They sat tight as Allied artillery finally skimmed in low over their heads and smashed into the enemy positions. The hill rocked in pandemonium from German mortar explosions, howling Allied artillery shells, and the wails and groans of the wounded. The air blanketed the combatants with dust, debris, and the bitter smell of explosives. During a break in action, Baker found the captain in a nearby stone house, sitting on the dirt floor, his arms wrapped around his legs. He was pale from fright. Seeing Baker, the captain tried to hide his fear and griped, Your men are scattered all over the place. Can't you keep them together? He's criticizing me while he's cowering in a corner? I'm doing the best I can, Captain. I'll get them ready for the assault. You actually want to stay here and fight? Yes, Captain, we can do this. We can take this castle. Looking into his terrified eyes, Baker figured the captain thought it was suicidal to try. Okay, you stay with your men, said the captain. I'll go back for reinforcements. Right, Captain. Baker was filled with disgust. In most cases during combat, the company commander was supposed to remain on the battlefield with his men and send a soldier back for reinforcements. The captain has been running ever since that German tossed a grenade at us. He's nothing but a chicken who cares only for himself. After the captain left, Baker and his remaining men gathered rifles and ammo from their dead comrades. But the hardest job for him was slipping the dog tags off the bodies. He stared at each one and thanked him. Some of their faces showed terror, others, pain. These men battled to the death. God bless them. Baker and the survivors then hid in a slight depression on the hill and waited for reinforcements. Suddenly, they were attacked again by mortars and heavy machine gun fire. The Americans fought valiantly and kept the enemy at bay. All the while, Baker was wondering when backup troops would arrive to help them. Through the smoke and debris, Baker saw a German soldier waving a white flag with a red cross, followed by a platoon carrying stretchers. "Gotta shoot them," Baker's men whispered. But Baker refused. "Hold your fire. If we shoot their medics, they'll shoot at ours." When the Germans were 50 yards away, they dropped the stretchers, whipped off the blankets, revealing hidden machine guns. "We've been tricked!" As the Germans picked up their weapons, Baker yelled, "Fire!" The Americans cut loose with a vengeance, mowing down the fake medics until the rest of the Germans ran off. By now, Baker was exhausted, dirty, blood-caked. Baker and his exhausted, dirty, blood-caked men were nearly out of ammunition. As the dust cleared, so did his thinking. We have too little ammo to attack the castle, and it's pretty obvious that reinforcements are not coming. There never were going to be any. The captain was going to let us die out here. We came so close, but it's no use now, not with so few men and little ammo. Baker sighed and said, "Men, it's time to withdraw." As his battered troops retreated, Baker remained behind to cover them, picking off one German and sending 3 others fleeing into the brush. Mortar fire started raining down again as the men raced down the hill. One of the soldiers fell dead, and Baker stopped long enough to jerk the dog tags from his neck. As the rest fled, they were met by sniper fire until one of Baker's men, Sergeant James Thomas, shot the German out of a tree. But then the soldiers were pinned down by the rapid fire below them from 2 machine gun nests that they had missed seeing on their way up the hill. The nests had to be destroyed if the men were to escape. "I'll take them out," said Baker. "Thomas, cover me." Thomas ripped off a flurry of rounds as Baker, low-crawling while cradling his M1 in his elbows, snaked his way towards the back of the nearest nest. Thomas's bullets flew over Baker's heads. My luck better not run out now, Baker thought, or I'll get my rear shot off by friendly fire. When he reached the back entrance of the nest, he lay on his side, pulled out a grenade, and lobbed it inside. He rolled away seconds before the nest exploded, sending dirt and splintered wood flying into the air. 1 down, 1 to go. After he signaled Thomas to start another firefight, this time with the Germans in the other nest, Baker sneaked up on the enemy from behind. In exactly the same way as before, he blew up the nest, silencing its machine gun. Then he got up and covered his men as they sprinted down the hill, through the brush, and back to the main road at the bottom, where American trucks, tanks, jeeps, and troops were gathering. Of the 26 men in his platoon, only 7 returned. Baker and his brave men had been fighting for 12 straight hours. He had wiped out 6 machine gun nests, 2 observation posts, and killed more than a dozen Germans. He finally caught his breath, and then he threw up. Baker had seen violent death before, but this was different. He couldn't get rid of the images in his mind of the men in his platoon who had been blown to pieces. He had fought side by side with them, laughed with them, eaten with them, and written letters for them. Now 19 of them are dead. When he reached headquarters, he pulled out of his pockets the blood-stained dog tags he had collected and dropped them on the company clerk's desk. "I hate war." He looked down and noticed a piece of shrapnel had lodged in the metal case of the compass that he had kept on the right side of his webbing belt. If the shrapnel hadn't been deflected by the compass, it would have sliced into his groin and severed an artery, causing him to bleed to death. His eyes watered up. Why was I so lucky, and 19 of my men weren't? His sadness turned to anger when he learned that what the captain said upon returning to headquarters. That captain had told the battalion commander not to worry about the black troops because they had all been wiped out. Baker seethed. They had no intention of helping us. They left us out there to die. Baker was summoned to the office of Colonel Raymond Sherman, who headed the regiment. What are the chances that I'll hear one word of appreciation for the sacrifices of my men? Baker wondered. Slim to none. And he was right. Racism trumped respect. Rather than offer Baker solace for his slaughtered platoon or praise him for his courageous actions, the colonel chewed him out for not wearing his helmet in battle and setting a bad example for his men. Then the colonel told him, the 473rd is taking over the advance tomorrow, and we need somebody who knows the terrain. You're volunteering to lead them. Now get out of here and wear your helmet tomorrow, or I'll bust you to buck, Private. The next day, Baker led an all-white company up the hill, where he was met with little resistance. By then, most of the Germans had fled. Thanks to the gutsy efforts of Baker and his men, the western edge of the Gothic line finally had been breached. We proved we could go up and fight and die, he told the surviving members of his platoon. We had cleared the way and made liars out of everyone who said we couldn't do it. He felt good about that, but he was angry that he and the black soldiers had yet to receive the respect and acknowledgement they deserved from the top brass. Despite the racism, Baker was promoted to first lieutenant several weeks later. He also was awarded the Purple Heart and the Distinguished Service Cross, making him one of the most decorated black soldiers in the war. But what he really wanted, admission from the white commanders that the black soldiers had fought valiantly, he never received. Nevertheless, Baker remained in the Army after the war and lived through its desegregation, becoming one of the first blacks to command an all-white company. After retiring from the Army, he spent nearly 20 years working for the Red Cross. The anger he felt for the way he and his fellow blacks were treated slowly diminished with time. He came to accept the fact that the 433 Medals of Honor given to soldiers who fought during World War II, not one of them was awarded to an African American, even though there were 1.7 million black troops. But then, a study commissioned by the U.S. Army in the 1990s concluded that racial discrimination among white commanders hid the truth about the combat heroics of African Americans. Investigators examined battle records and interviewed former soldiers and concluded that 7 blacks deserved the Medal of Honor. One of them was Vernon Baker. He was stunned when he heard the news. It didn't seem possible that more than half a century after he had led the bold charge towards Castle Gandolfi, Baker was finally getting the recognition that he and his platoon deserved. At a ceremony at the White House in 1997, President Bill Clinton awarded Medals of Honor to Baker and 6 other black soldiers. Baker, 76 at the time, was the only recipient still living. Accepting the honor, Baker broke down in tears. He didn't cry for himself, but for all the heroes who died on Hill X that fateful day in April 1945. We knew we were fighting for a country that didn't appreciate us, and yet we were proud to fight, Baker said. President Clinton said we Medal of Honor recipients were denied the nation's highest honor, but their deeds could not be denied. Those words describe my platoon and of all the black men who have valiantly gone to combat in every war this country has ever fought.